Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Sabina Sheck, and I'm the Director of the Program on Global Environment here at the University of Chicago. Thank you for joining us for this timely, important, and very critical discussion on the unique and ongoing challenges to ensuring food access throughout the world. Locally, it is a priority for the University of Chicago, along with the Greater Chicago Food Depository and the City of Chicago, among many of our partners across the South Side of the city. We will soon hear more from three panelists with a world of expertise and experience on hunger and nutrition from our South Side neighborhoods in Chicago to informal settlements across the global South. Today's conversation is brought to you by the Frizzell Learning and Speaker Series, which is dedicated to the memory of University of Chicago student Alexandra Frizzell. I'd like to thank the Frizzell family, who is with us here today, for their continued support, and the members of the Student Advisory and Research Council, who worked tirelessly this year to identify topics and speakers through their engaged research on sustainable development. I'm sure that Alex Frizzell would be proud of the students for curating today's event, featuring three women who have been advocates, scholars, and leaders in advancing food security and nutrition, the status of women and girls, organizational and institutional reform, and the development of frameworks needed to support people across the globe. I would like to thank our speakers in advance, Anni Beukes, Catherine Bertini, and Ertharin Cousin for joining us today, and our co-sponsors, the college, the Mansueto Institute for Urban Innovation, Chicago Studies, and the Institute for Politics here at the university. One quick note on logistics, you will see a Q&A window where we welcome you to type your questions for the panelists at any time. We would like to know where you are located, so if you're comfortable sharing that information with us, please add that to your question. You can also upvote questions of interest, and our moderator will address as many of these questions as she can in the last 20 minutes of the event, as well as draw from the ones you've submitted through the registration link in advance. Now, on to the main event. I'd like to introduce my friend and research collaborator and today's esteemed moderator, Anni Beukes. Anni is a resident fellow at the Mansueto Institute for Urban Innovation, where she studies how digital mapping and other analytical approaches affect marginalized communities around the world. She's one of the developers of the Million Neighborhoods Map, which provides the first comprehensive look at informal settlements across the global South. Anni has previously served as the data ecosystem manager at Slum Dwellers International and has rich experiences and expertise to share with us today. Anni will now introduce you to our panelists and start the conversation. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Sabina. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We are very happy that you're taking the time out of your busy schedules to to join us and to share with us some of the thoughts around food security around the world, but also locally in our own neighborhoods. The World Food Programme has recently warned of a hunger pandemic that could leave 250 million people without adequate food or nutrition. The COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted local and global food systems and all aspects of the supply chain. Especially essential workers, many of them in undocumented workers on farms and factories across the food production and delivery system, face new risks and uncertainties. Girls and women, who are often the primary meal providers, in many low and middle income countries, food pantry employees and volunteers, truck drivers and grocery store employees, stocking shelves, restaurant workers, and those in the gig economy delivering meals are disproportionately at risk of contracting the virus as they do not have the luxury to shelter in place. So as families around the world face heightened economic hardship, and existing safety nets designed to address food security and end hunger are already under strain. Today we are, as Sabina said, very lucky to have with us two very wonderful women from former directors of the World Food Programme, and I will introduce them shortly to you. Before I do that, though, I would like to say a big word of thanks again to the students of the University of Chicago, the college students who have put together this program, and who the questions that I'll be asking our panelists today have come from our students. And so to start off, I would like to introduce Catherine. Catherine Bertini is currently a distinguished fellow at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Ms. Bertini is the 2003 World Food Prize laureate for transformational leadership at the World Food Programme, which she directed for 10 years. She is the founder of the Catherine Bertini Trust Fund for Girls' Education, which supports programs to increase opportunities for girls and women to attend school. As the United Nations Under-Secretary General, she led UN humanitarian missions to the Horn of Africa and to Gaza, the West Bank, and Israel. Ms. Bertini is a professor emeritus at Syracuse University, board member of the Stewart Family Foundation and the Global Food Banking Network, former Rockefeller Foundation Fellow, and chair of the board of the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition Gain. Thank you very much, Catherine, for joining us.
Thank you. I'm delighted.
And now I'd like to introduce our second speaker to you, Ertharin Cousin. Ertharin Cousin is currently a visiting scholar at the Center on Food Security and the Environment at Stanford University and Distinguished Fellow at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Ms. Cousin served as the Executive Director of the World Food Program from 2012 until 2017 and the US Ambassador to the UN Agencies for Food and Agriculture in Rome. Prior to her global hunger work, she served as Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of America's Second Harvest, now Feeding America. Previously, Ms. Cousin served as Senior Vice President for Albertsons Food and was appointed by the US President to the Board for International Food and Agricultural Development. Ms. Cousin has been named on the Forbes 100 Most Powerful Women list and as the Fortune Most Powerful Women in Food and Drink and on Time's 100 Most Influential People list. And as one of the 500 most powerful people on the planet by Foreign Policy magazine. We are truly in the company of great, great women leaders today, and I wish to thank them again for taking the time to join us. Our discussion will draw on the panelists' expertise in addressing these issues on food security at different governmental scales and even entities like the UN. We look forward to them sharing their wisdom, inspiration, and hope with us as we deal with the unfolding crisis now and how we may innovate our efforts towards more resilient food systems and resources. What may be done now and in the future to support food businesses and protect essential workers? How may we ensure that women and children are protected and the most vulnerable people have access to food amid the COVID-19 pandemic? I would now like to invite Catherine and Ertharin to give some brief opening remarks. Please, Catherine.
Thank you very much, Annie. And it's a pleasure to be here with you and always with Ertharin and certainly with our hosts at the University of Chicago and the Frizzell family. When we look at the numbers of hungry people around the world, it has been a partially at least good news story in the past, because as the numbers of hungry people have decreased over time, even though the population has been increasing, it's been primarily because of economic development, of better opportunities for people. So the numbers are still unconscionable numbers, but the good news was that economic development made a big difference. Now, of course, that we're seeing so many families and individuals struggling to have any money at all to be able to buy food, to provide shelter, to be able to move from place to place, to do anything because of the impact of COVID-19, we're seeing increases in the number of hungry people. And as Annie said at the beginning, that World Food Program is saying that those increases are only going to continue and possibly get to really untenable proportions. So that's what we're seeing now, the negative impact of the economy on the numbers of hungry people. And that's what we have to be able to react to individually, collectively, as governments, as community organizations, and as fellow human beings.
Thank you, Kath.
Thank you. I am so honored to be here today. I'm always proud when I have the ability to join Catherine Bertini in a conversation like this one. And I want to join her in thanking our host, the Frizzell family, and of course, the University of Chicago and the students who've been involved in planning today's program. Part of the challenge of addressing the issue of food insecurity in the world is ensuring that we have the public will that is required for the investment and the sustained action that is necessary to overcome structural and systemic challenges that create food insecurity in the world. So it takes this type of engagement with the public and these opportunities to present these issues to a broader audience that will provide the foundation necessary for creating that public will. When we think about food security today and the challenges that COVID exacerbates in the food security challenge, if we look at what is the issue that is the most critical, I'm always hesitant to point to one issue over another, to make one hungry person in the world more important than another. But in this time, we noted, it was noted in the opening, that yes, there are 820 million people who are food insecure, and some 130 million people who were acutely food insecure before COVID. And what the World Food Program now is warning the world, that we could add another 135 million people to that number, which what that means is those are the people who are what we call in the development community phase 4 acutely hungry, which means that without international assistance, without humanitarian aid, they will starve. And before COVID, we had 135 million people in that position, most of them in conflict-affected places. And with COVID, without additional support, what we often see is governments repositioning their support to what they believe is the most acute. So if we begin to address challenges of those who are impacted by COVID to the detriment of that 135 million, we will see an additional 130 million people added to that number of those who are acutely hungry and on the verge of starvation. And it's really difficult to suggest that in 2020, with the food system improvements that we've made, the economic development progress that has been achieved that Catherine noted, that we could actually see, as WFP says, some 60,000 people in starvation mode on a daily basis if we don't address this challenge in an appropriate manner. So I am honored to be here today to talk about these issues. What are the challenges, as well as what are the opportunities for us to avoid the level of crisis that I've just described, that the WFP warns of, and also to talk about how this is not just a problem over there, but a problem here at home domestically as well. So thank you for this opportunity to be with you today.
Thank you very much, Ertharin. And on that note, I would like to start off to also just share a little bit from my own experience. As Sabina introduced me, she mentioned that I was at Slum Dwellers International, which is an international network of poor communities working together in cities across around almost 30 countries around the global south. And the sort of in my own life and professional experience, the Ebola outbreak of 2014 to 2015 in West Africa was very big part of my professional life. And just shortly after the end of the outbreak, which was really, I think about 48 days after it ended, Liberia was declared now Ebola free. A group of us, including leaders from Sierra Leone, Kenya, Uganda, we went to Monrovia to support the newly formed federation in documenting the households in West Point, which is one of the largest informal settlements in the city. And the reason why communities in SDI document and count households is exactly this, is that in order for development to flow, you need to know, as Catherine, I beg your pardon, as Ertharin just mentioned to us, numbers are important. We need to know how many people are affected by this, because data helps us to design and to plan our responses, not just for the immediate, but also for the change. So the story I want to share a little bit with you is that, and sort of which brought food security to focus for me while my work continues to be in really the provision of basic services. The communities themselves design the surveys that the SDI federations use. So this is the process that can take a couple of months because it's a lot of negotiation. One of the questions that the community in West Point put on their survey, which is something that had never occurred to me, was, has the family been able to provide in all its food needs for the past 7 days? And that for me really brought into focus how big a part hunger plays in the everyday lives of our slum communities, but also, as we know now, in communities in developed cities. So I think I agree with Ertharin fully that we shouldn't put one issue or one challenge above the others. But this experience has taught me is exactly that when we think about how do we react, or how do we, I don't know what the proper word is, but how do we address these issues? We have to think of people as whole beings, and we have to think of our communities as whole systems. So I am very excited that we're having this conversation today. And I think that ending hunger has been and remains at the top of the global development agenda. We've seen this since the Millennium Development Goals. In the US, we have seen grocery shelves empty and ever-increasing lines in food pantries. In Belgium, the government has asked its citizens to consume twice their daily normal consumption of French fries to avoid potato harvest rotting on the fields. In Freetown, Sierra Leone, I was just telling Catherine earlier, it's one of my favorite places in the world. One of the market queens mobilized seamstresses in the market to sew and donate 5,000 face masks to the city, so that the informal markets could remain open and people continue to sell and buy food. In my native Namibia and South Africa, the governments closed down informal markets, effectively shutting off the poorest of communities and street vendors from accessing food. In Mumbai and many slums around the world, many neighborhoods and nonprofits, community-based organizations, local governments, and even local businesses are preparing and delivering parcels to vulnerable households and families, especially seniors and others at risk. And it is with that tone that I would like to kick off our discussion to ask both Ertharin and Catherine to share their views around, in the international stage, how they have observed reactions to the crisis. How have they seen the international community coming together on the global to address the global issue of food insecurity, particularly within this pandemic, if at all? Maybe all these efforts are local. And then to just ask them, what do they think it will take on whether or not we will see food supply chains become more regionalized, or will they remain in this sort of very global system? So I would like to invite Ertharin to start us off on this part of the conversation, because as I learned, she is one of the most recent directors of the food program. Please, Ertharin.
Well, thank you very much. There's a lot packed in those questions that and I think we need to think about them in different ways. As we look at the type of activities that you've described, the humanitarian response to COVID-19, what are we seeing? We are seeing many of the government pivoting their international programs to support COVID relief. For example, I'm working with the government in Rwanda right now, where they have reprogrammed dollars from USAID, and we have generated funds from a donor, the Eleanor Crook Foundation, to buy eggs from small producers. The egg industry in Rwanda is very nascent, but growing. And when markets were closed as part of the the quarantine, the lockdown efforts in response to COVID-19, it meant that there were no longer hotels or restaurants to sell these eggs to. And so you saw the potential for double crisis with the smallholder farmers. They did not have the the money coming in that for the purchase of the eggs, which meant that they also could no longer buy feed for their birds. So the possibility for them to lose those birds because of the birds going hungry was quite real. And so having the ability then to purchase those eggs from the producers to then include in the government's basket of food, they're providing baskets of food that include primarily maize, rice, beans, but now this gave them an opportunity to use an animal-based protein, the eggs, in baskets, particularly in households that have children under 5 or pregnant and breastfeeding women, to give them this additional protein. So you're seeing that kind of novel pivot by governments, by humanitarian organizations to support not just the food needs, but those economic gains that Catherine described before, those programs that begin to provide the supply chain and economic assistance that create food systems that not only feed, but provide income. And so the opportunities for those kinds of investments are coming online. To your question of, will we see more of this type of development of shorter supply chains from, as opposed to cross-border regional supply chains, more supply chains that support households? That is a question that many are talking about now. What is that answer? The suggestion that we will no longer have a global food system, I think, is a non-starter. We will continue to have commodities, particularly those commodities that make up the 60% of all global diets, rice and wheat, and other grains. You will continue to see those global supply chains become ever more robust. And it is important that we maintain those supply chains during this crisis. But you will also see investments in shortening supply chains around what are called specialized crops, more produce, the fruits, vegetables, as well as how can we create shorter supply chains for animal-based proteins like poultry, fish, and even cattle. That is the mantra of institutions from the World Economic Forum to the USDA here in the United States. As we look at how we address the smaller farmers and the urban growers that have increased in their capacities with their abilities to support shorter supply chains. With I'll stop here when we can talk a bit more about US supply chains, but I think that just to specifically answer your question, the food system will continue to evolve. What COVID will do is sharpen the focus on moving beyond just the efficiency of global supply chains, but also creating diversity in supply chains to create more localized and regional supply chains that will benefit not just the consumers, but also the farmers.
Thank you so much, Ertharin. That is so encouraging to hear, and I'm very excited to hear that these are already thoughts that are actively being acted upon and actively being addressed. And I love what you said about how this current crisis will sharpen our focus to create diversity in our food supply system, both at local and more regional levels, so that both consumers and the producers of food, and also everybody in between, can benefit. Thank you so much for that. Catherine, do you have any thoughts for us to share on one of the 3 questions I put in there?
Several years ago, there was a global humanitarian summit in Istanbul. Ertharin was then the executive director of WFP, and she invited me to go also to be part of her delegation. And so I was struck there that though the international community means all the UN agencies and NGOs and in fact all the governments who support them, because none of them are independent on their own, that the focus was on communities and community decision making. And the whole attitude at the time was, we really should change the way we operate from making decisions in headquarters in New York or Rome or Geneva to making decisions based around what the community wants and needs. Now, there was a lot of rhetoric there, and I'm not sure how much actual action went on between then and now, until now, because you cannot solve hunger by making a decision in Rome or Geneva or New York. You've got to be able to trust and support the community who is actually going to do it. The people who are handling the poultry and egg production that Ertharin talked about. The people who are working in Namibia or Sierra Leone, Annie, or some of your other examples. And here in the US, for instance, I participate in the local county hunger coalition. And yes, they need assistance from people who write checks. They need grants from the US government or from foundations, but nothing is going to happen unless somebody is passing out those meals that USDA provides to the children to replace what they would be getting in school. And nothing's going to happen unless somebody figures out a way for the farmers to be able to open shops to be able to sell their goods to the local consumers, or to the local organizations who can buy them and distribute them to people who can't afford them. It's all local, no matter where it is. So hopefully the silver lining of this, or one of the silver linings of this terrible crisis, will be that there will be much more action and decision making and respect for decision making at the local levels, wherever that is, because this is not going to be a solvable problem from on high. And one other point I think is that when we do talk about international organizations, as I said, they're funded by governments mostly, of course, sometimes foundations and other donors, but mostly governments. So what are governments really doing? And from what I've seen so far, in addition to fighting the pandemic in their own countries, they are looking at what are the most creative ways that they can help communities to solve or prevent some of the big hunger crises. And to that end, I got off the phone earlier this morning with the executive director of GAIN, the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. As you mentioned, I chair their board. And Lawrence Haddad was talking about the different donors who have come in to him, for instance, to GAIN, the Canadian government, for example, who hadn't been a donor before, but said, you're doing some really creative work and we want to be able to help support that. And I see that more and more in this crisis. So I think it'll be another potentially good that's come out of it.
Thank you, Catherine. I cannot agree with you more on the emphasis on local and how we can see what creative ways are coming from the local, and also what creative ways governments at all levels are seeing how they can support those local efforts. And so that's actually a wonderful segue to bring our conversation to the US, specifically domestically, because we are situated here all of us have relationships to Chicago, which is the city of dreams, whatever everyone says about it. But before I get on to our discussion around the domestic situation, specifically in the US for communities, I would just like to give a little plug for our podcasters from Hidden Gems, who are going to be featuring both Ertharin and Catherine soon on their podcast called Hidden Gems, which is a student podcast by fourth-year students here from the University of Chicago, Julia, Sophia, and Kamika. So please go to uchicagohiddengems.com, subscribe to their podcast, and you can hear more of the wisdom of both Ertharin and Catherine. So now on that note, I'd like to turn our discussion to the situation in the US domestically. We have seen high levels of unemployment. We are starting to see the fallout of what we can only describe as probably going to be one of the harshest recessions ever to hit the US economy. We have seen food pantries under stock. I would like to invite each of you, and there's some I'm going to ask Catherine, if you wouldn't mind going first, to share a little bit from your observations of the situation here domestically in the US, and especially around some of the concerns that the students have raised in their questions, which is access to nutritious food often, and how already food deserts exist in poor communities in many large US cities. So please, Catherine, if you could share.
Okay. The change in the food system looks like it may bring some of what Ertharin was talking about before. It may be able to bring some more nutritious foods into food deserts, into urban communities and elsewhere. And I say that because when communities see what's happening to farmers, when they see, for instance, in Florida, so many fruits having to be destroyed because there's no way to move them elsewhere, when they see dairy farmers around upstate New York having to dump out their milk, that's been a real motivation to people to say, how can we save that? How can we save those resources, and how can we use them elsewhere? And what I think it looks like it's going to mean potentially, I mean, there's a long way to go, but what it looks like it's going to mean potentially is that there are more creative ways being put together to salvage that milk, to buy milk from the farmer that otherwise he or she can't sell to the restaurants, for instance, and to be able to convert that and be able to share it in shelters and in food distribution centers. And it's doing the same kinds of thing with fruits and vegetables. So whereas now in many times in shops in inner cities, there's not a lot of produce, there's not a lot of fruits and vegetables available. And there are both distribution and economic reasons for that, but there may be in the future that there's much more of that. And once farmers markets get back up in many different communities, that also could provide some additional resources available, especially because food stamps, SNAP, now called SNAP, are eligible in many farmers markets many farmers markets are eligible for people to use SNAP. So with an increased production from local farmers, that may help as well. So I like to look at the glass is half full instead of half empty, and not so much bemoan how terrible the crisis is, and it is, but rather look for where there may be opportunities. And I think students that are listening and others who are listening can look in those opportunities in their own communities as well. And if they don't exist, they can create them. For instance, USDA has some grants now available that could help support this improved connection between local farmers and local communities.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Catherine. Absolutely. I am a strong proponent of seeing the opportunity in every challenge, and how can we make the best of the situation that we have and innovate new ideas. And I think you've touched on just not just for our communities here in in the US and domestic. But we had a question this morning from one of our friends in Sierra Leone asking, how do we see the rural-urban food linkage is also proceeding. And I think both you and Ertharin have already given us some really interesting observations and also efforts that are underway in that respect. Ertharin, please, could you tell us your view of the US at the moment?
Yeah, well, thank you. Let me just build on what Catherine started saying. And she talked about those grant programs at the USDA for linking the promotion of local farm and community agriculture programs to communities. The grant applications are due on Tuesday. So if you're interested, go on the USDA site today because they're live right now for programs to start in September. Let me speak to the specific question that you asked about food deserts, and we don't want to call them food deserts because they are economic deserts, they are education deserts, they are social justice deserts, and not just food deserts. And they are communities that lack the access to economic. Many of these are communities that lack access to economic opportunity. And the challenge that we see with COVID-19 has shined a light on an issue in these communities that many of us have been working to address for quite some time. And that is the lack of access to affordable, nutritious food. And where corner stores and gas stations substitute for grocery stores in too many of these communities around the country. And rather than fruits and vegetables and other nutritious food, you have high fat, high salt, high calorie, low nutritional value, cheap foods, which is what particularly young people, as well as older people, consume. And what that has meant is that we're now seeing headlines that talk about the increased impact of COVID in Black communities on morbidity because of these underlying pre-existing conditions. You know, 49% of the people hospitalized for COVID had some form of diet-related pre-existing conditions. The most prevalent is hypertension, with 49% of the deaths from COVID being those who suffer from hypertension. 48% are from those who suffered from obesity, both diet-related diseases. So the opportunity for us to now shine a light on this, and as we begin to grow back better, is how we're talking about it, is how do we not just flatten the curve on COVID, but flatten the curve on malnutrition in our communities by investing in not just grocery stores, but other distribution tools for providing access to new foods. And there are lots of innovative tools coming online across different communities. Daily Bread in Boston, which is a nonprofit grocery store that provides nutritious food at low prices to consumers that otherwise would not have access to those foods. We also see SNAP benefits now being used to purchase online. But the reality of it is that even though we are touting the access to online purchases, which you and I take for granted as a way to get nutritious food into our houses when we can't go out, those benefits today can only be used in big box stores. They can't be used for co-ops and farmers markets and local grocery stores. And so working to expand the opportunity for SNAP beneficiaries to use those benefits for online purchases of nutritious food is one way to grow back better. Another way is Catherine talked about farmers markets, and when farmers markets come back online and how now you can use SNAP benefits in farmers markets. We also have the Double Up Bucks program, which allows for any SNAP beneficiary to double the amount that they can spend on foods, on fruits and vegetables, produce in farmers markets using these vouchers. Every year that program runs out of money. So coming out of COVID, we are looking to increase the amount of money in the Double Up Bucks program to ensure access for more inner city and low income households to giving them the ability to afford more nutritious food. So these are the types of both government activities as well as private sector new channels for bringing food into these communities that we must now stop talking about and begin to scale up the programs that are working in a manner that will allow us to address the nutrition challenges that lack of access to nutritious food has created in too many of our communities around the country.
Thank you so much. I really feel like I can spend a week just sitting at both of your feet. And I feel like we've covered so many topics here that I think we almost need to put together a masterclass or a multi-day, really intensive workshop with students to talk about these things. And we are very excited today. We have, apart from our students from University of Chicago, community members here in Chicago, we also have people joining us as far as France, Nigeria, and Sierra Leone. So we want to say thank you to everyone for taking the time. And yeah, and I want to sort of kick off our part where we sort of have questions from our audience, and one of the sort of final questions and from our students, and because this is an event for our students, one of the questions that I quickly want to turn to both of you to draw from your vast experience, both as incredible women leaders, both internationally and nationally. Around tell us something about your career path and what you could share with our, especially our young women who are thinking of international careers. I know myself, it's a big world out there. So a little bit to share about career path, some of the things that have inspired you along your career, what you could advise any one of our students who's thinking of a career in food security or in policy more general. I think, Ertharin, you have so vividly sketched how, again, and I want to keep on coming back to this, that these are systems problems, that it's not just about food, it's about the economy, it's about schools, it's about access to healthcare. So really just for our students, if you could share a little bit about your career and how you see gender, food security, and these things have impacted your own choices and thoughts around this. Catherine, let me start with you.
Sure. Well, first I have a message to any political science majors at the University of Chicago. This is what you can do with a bachelor's degree in political science. I went to college because I wanted to make a difference somewhere, and I wanted to be in government somewhere. I had no clue what that meant or what I would really do. And when I finished with college, I was in politics for about 5 years. Mm-hmm. And at Ertharin and I are different political parties, but we both have political, if you see, political paths mm-hmm. that ultimately got us to the World Food Program, actually. But I then said, now I want to do something else that'll prepare me to be in government. So I went into government affairs for a corporation in Chicago. And then I learned a lot about private sector, business management, HR, finance, mm-hmm. and that then was the background I needed to join government at a moderately high level. So I was able to define then to the Reagan administration that I wanted to work in social service delivery, and I wanted to work somewhere where I could help make services more accessible and better for what people who wouldn't have the access that I had or I could help those people. So I first joined HHS, Health and Human Services, running the welfare programs, and then was appointed by, nominated by President George Herbert Walker Bush to be Assistant Secretary at USDA in charge of the domestic food programs. And from there, I was nominated by the US government to be the Executive Director of the World Food Program. So that was my political path. If you students are looking for a path now, and it's not political, it's not the only path, certainly. But I would say if you want to go into international work, that after you finish your degree, you need 2 more things, at least. One is experience in the field, which is to say, work in Sierra Leone or Namibia or India or somewhere. And yes, as Annie did. And because that is one of the things that will propel you into the UN. You could also join the Peace Corps. We recruited a lot of people from the Peace Corps because they have had that experience. And second, it was really helpful to get a graduate degree. I don't have one, but so it's not absolutely imperative, but it's very helpful and useful. And then one of the things I hope you already have is facility in a second language or more than 2 languages. And if you don't, you really should work on those. In the UN, we hire people that speak English and another UN language. And so that's important too. And sometimes in the US, we're very cocky about, well, I'm really good and I've had all this experience here and I don't really need another language. But you're competing with Canadians who come with French and English, and Europeans who come with multiple languages and so forth, that you need another language. So anyway, that's my shorthand advice for students. Master's degree experience and languages, or be in politics and be in the right place at the right time and be good at what you do.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Ertharin.
Let me just say amen to everything that Catherine has just said.
Amen.
Particularly to American students on the languages. I can't say it any better than she did. I just want to underscore it because it is so important. And we are at a disadvantage often as Americans because we don't speak a second or a third language. And that is something that we need to recognize, that despite the fact that you carry a US passport, you need to speak another language if you want to work in international affairs. I won't go over the other points because I think, as I said, that one is so close to the skin for me because I always felt a disadvantage as an American who has some additional language skills, but not conversational. And that made me always feel like I could do better. And so I'll leave that there. Let me also add for students, particularly women students, we need more students we need more women professionals in nutrition and agriculture. I can't tell you how many times I've sat around a table where there was one other woman, maybe, when we were having a conversation about agricultural programs. And as we look at needing to increase agricultural production by 50% by 2050, and when the population is projected to go to 9.5 to 10 billion people, we will need not just more agronomists, but more women, because between 40% and 70% of those who perform the labor of agriculture are women. And in many of these cultures, women are not allowed to attend the training classes that are led by men. And so we will not achieve that 50% increase if we don't increase the productivity of women farmers as we move forward. And so getting more women into a position to lead in this space is critical. So those opportunities are going to continue to expand. There are also opportunities that will continue to expand both from a humanitarian standpoint as a development standpoint in data and AI and the tools that were foreign to people like me or non-existent when I began my career, but will be critical to our ability to leapfrog the challenges of the past to create the productivity in the food system that we require for the future. And so having students recognize that there are, just as you talked about your work in data, that there are significant opportunities that did not exist 5 years ago that are coming online today for creative students who can bring new tools and new business processes to support the kind of structural changes that we have been discussing into the system is I can't overstate. And the last area that I'd like to identify is the area of cybersecurity. We think about cybersecurity from a business standpoint, but not from a humanitarian or development standpoint. But as more systems are reliant upon data, it is going to become ever more important that we also have the protection, the tools in place to protect those systems, to ensure that the same cybersecurity benefits and privacy requirements that we as users of systems demand, that we can provide those to those we serve and to those who we work with across the globe. And so those kind of opportunities didn't exist in the past, but they will. And your student and the students who are listening today, we need your leadership, your creativity, and your innovation in these spaces to support a system that will achieve the goals and aims that the global community embraced in the Sustainable Development Goals, that we are behind on today because we don't have the necessary tools and investments that are necessary, that will ensure that we can make the progress that's required.
Mm-hmm. Thank you both so much. And just as a reminder again, thank you for the inspiration for our students. And just as a reminder again, our students, Julia, Sophia, and Kamika are moderating and curating a podcast called Hidden Gems, which is a fully moderated and curated student podcast to address some of these issues around their program in global environment here at the University of Chicago and also the Chicago Studies program. So I really think that you have given me so much inspiration right now. My head was going sort of as like how in my own work, some of the things that you said come together and can maybe even think of a new career for myself.
You got a really good one already.
Thank you very much. I want to thank Catherine Ertharin again today for our for discussing this with us. And as we said, if you want to hear more from them, please tune into the Hidden Gems podcast from the University of Chicago students. And I think we have so many questions that have come to us today from around the world. But like I've said, they're really the importance and the centrality of the topic that we discussed today. And again, I think just our speakers, how truly blessed we have been to have them with us today. I think that the breadth of their knowledge and experience and their own sincerity and dedication in this space, they have answered so many of the questions that I see coming up here. We had a comment coming from us from the south of France, exactly right, what you had mentioned about the local food systems, how they were in the supermarkets all of a sudden more of the locally grown vegetables available. Those speak to some of the changes that you have spoken for, and that both of you I know have advocated for in your long careers at the international and local levels. There have been one of the questions here, or more a comment, was around how to, and Ertharin, you spoke about this and gave so many good examples about how important it is actually to look at the systems we already have and to really strengthen those systems. And how do we make our systems robust, both at the local and at the global level, and how our world is so entwined. One of our participants have asked around the role of climate change. I think you have addressed that already. We know around in terms of climate change, it is our impending major crisis that we have to face as a global community, but that it would also impact us very diversely at the local level, and that the lessons we can learn, as you both mentioned, from how we deal with the crisis right now can really give us some pathways to follow and lights to follow on how to deal with other crises, because these are our systems problems. So again, I want to thank both of you for taking the time to speak with us and to inspire us. I think that really you are both two incredible women leaders, and for us as young women to be able to spend this time with you and to hear your advice on careers is an incredible opportunity, and one we wouldn't get every day. So thank you again for your time. I would also like to thank again our sponsors for this event, the Frizzell family for sponsoring the event, the University of Chicago Institute of Politics, the University of Chicago Program on Global Environment, the Mansueto Institute for Urban Innovation, and the Chicago Studies Program here at the university. And moreover than anyone, I want to thank our students for curating this event and putting it together. I think it is a show of their leadership capacity and ability that they were able to bring together this event today. And we had at one point, we had over 80 people joining our event today. So I think that is really great. We have 2 minutes left, and I want to give those 2 minutes, since I think I've given the word of thanks. I just want to give 1 minute each to Catherine and Ertharin to just give us one final sentence they would like for us to carry through, both in this time and going forward. Please, Catherine.
Nutrition is critical to healthy life, but it's been forgotten by the health industry and the agriculture industry, who have had other priorities. So one of the silver linings I hope that comes out of this crisis is that policymakers, industry leaders, community activists all understand that nutrition is critically important in health and in agriculture, and ought to be a primary focus of what kind of healthcare we provide on an ongoing basis, and why we grow food. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Ertharin, please.
Our food system, whether domestic or international, requires change. And we are bringing on new innovations to address the gaps in the food system. We must ensure that new market-based businesses, from the farm to how we dispose of waste, come online, but not just for the benefit of the affluent. Too often, innovations that come online and for our food system are the markets that are developed are for the affluent farmers, affluent consumers, and as a result, we are creating ever greater disparity in how we produce as well as how we consume. We must overcome this challenge by seeing the opportunity that investment in small farmers, whether we're talking domestically or smallholder farmers in the developed world, that providing the tools that are necessary for them to become more efficient and part of systems that support the reduction in lost food through that system is achieved. And that will require investors as well as governments thinking different about vulnerable populations as markets. But as that thinking evolves, we can begin to address the challenges that Catherine spoke of access to nutritious food, not just through programs, but through market systems that allow for everyone, everywhere, universal access to affordable, nutritious food.
Thank you both so much. Well, everybody, thank you very much for joining us today. There you have it. And if you want to hear more from both Ertharin and Catherine, do subscribe and tune into the Hidden Gems podcast of our fourth year students here at the University of Chicago. Again, thank you to Catherine and Ertharin for joining us today and for sharing so much with us. Thank you to everyone behind the scenes, Julie, Sabina, Joe, for organizing this, and to Kamika and the other students. Thank you very much, and keep well and keep safe. And to everybody from wherever you are, look after each other and eat healthy and help others to eat healthy too. Thank you very much. Goodbye.